a candidate in Ward 3. Kevin?
15 minutes is hard for candidates, people on council, so I appreciate that. So I'm gonna try to speak kind of quickly, because I have a lot to say, and then still leave time for people to ask questions of me as well. So the first thing I'd like to say is I'm glad to be back here. Why am I here? Well, I am a lifelong Democrat, and before we became our own county, I was very involved in the Boulder County Democrats. I've been involved in various ways with the Broomfield Democrats since its formation. I've been an officer, a volunteer, precinct captain. I chaired the platform committee for a number of years, and that was while I was on council, actually. I've certainly walked and contributed for candidates, set up for different events like the Carter Dinner and so on. So I'm familiar. You say, well, so where have you been? And my answer to that is, well, I actually have been here. Like I said, I chaired the platform committee, I've done other things, attended events. But when I was on council from 2007 through 2015, intentionally walked back a little bit, which a lot of people on council have done, because it's a nonpartisan office. And so you really need to be able to represent everybody and have conversations with everybody. And Kevin alluded to that. You know, it should be nonpartisan. And so, of course, I'm here to ask for your support, because I think that we have a lot of the same values, and that's why we're here. I also enjoy a lot of support from across the political spectrum. But if you talk to actually every Republican council member that I've served with or that's on council now supports my campaign, but it's not because they agree with me, and they would tell you that. I have voted against every single one of them. I've talked to every single one of them about things I disagree about. The reason they're supporting me is because I've done the job well. So I'm always willing to talk. I'm always willing to listen for things that maybe I didn't understand before I heard the full range of things that are being offered up. Why am I running now? I was on for 8 years. I believe in term limits. I would have left after 8 years, regardless of the term limits. And over the last 4 years, I've been on a number of different boards and commissions and committees, mostly nonprofit around town. I also have a 2-year-old son, and I'm fortunate enough to be at home with him full time. So if you've ever experienced that, you'll understand kind of the perspective that gives you and the joy as well. I came to this particular race very late. I was the last candidate to file, and the reason isn't even specific to my own ward so much is the fact that I just feel like I could bring some experience and knowledge. So when Kevin was talking about a training program and talking about the complexities of the city's finances, and we have a brand new city manager, and the fact that we have difficult transportation issues, health and safety issues, infrastructure issues, growth issues, economic development issues, those things take a lot of time. When I first came onto council, I had 0 experience, as everybody does. And I think that's great. I'm a huge advocate for having new blood, but I also learned a tremendous amount from council members that were already there. So when I was elected, I had 0 experience. Todd Schumacher had 0 experience. Pat Quinn was our mayor, he had 0 experience. All the other council members, if you added up their experience, 44 years of experience that they brought to the table, which was incredibly beneficial. George DeCiro was the city manager. He had been there for 40 years and a month. Jennifer Hoffman is our new city manager. She's been here for a month. So now is a time when I feel that the city and county can benefit from some of that knowledge and expertise. And I promise you that I'm not going to be on for 8, not for 4, not for 8, not for 4. That's not my plan at all. I just feel like I have a civic responsibility to bring my talents and my understanding and my interests to the fore. So let's talk about a couple of issues. I think every time we have a conversation like this, you have to talk about oil and gas because obviously it takes a lot of time and people are very concerned about it. So let me be very clear. I don't support fracking in anybody's backyard. I don't support anything that would allow current operations to be unsafe. I think we need to have robust controls in place, inspections. We need to cap wells appropriately. We need to have proper reclamation. We need to ensure that from the very beginning. We we need to secure bonds to help pay for that so people can't take profits and walk away. I would remind you that even though most of this conversation occurred after I had already left council, I'm the only council member in 2013 when the referendum was put before the people to ban fracking, to try to help the citizens that put that on the ballot include the wording around health and safety on the ballot. I'm the only one. So that's always been a deep concern for me. By the way, I was not successful in doing that. And part of that was based on advice from the city and county attorney about what ballot language can include. And council was advised that that was prejudicial. So I'm not sure how to tell somebody that the implications or for health and safety is prejudicial, but I did fight for that. In 2000, I'm trying to remember the exact years, I think it was 2011, and we started the Sustainability Task Force at that time. There were 2 council members that were appointed to that task force. I was appointed and Linda Reynolds. Sam Taylor was on the task force, but he was actually appointed when he was a citizen and then finished up when he was on council because it took so long. It was supposed to be 6 months, it took 18 months. And a lot of that was fighting back and forth. And so at the end of the day, we came forward with some fairly robust recommendations around sustainability. As far as I'm concerned, they didn't go far enough. But it was a fairly conservative council at the time. And it was not going to pass. In fact, Linda Reynolds, like I said, was the other council representative, was actually opposing it. So I sought to find ways to move this forward and respect all of the work that people had done over that time. And I got it passed, although it was a much weaker version. I still consider that a victory because it opened a conversation about sustainability and a place to jump off, a framework that we can work from. And so there are new initiatives taking place, and I totally support those. So you say, well, you didn't really accomplish much in terms of actual outcomes, and I agree with that. I was pushing for more robust outcomes. But again, I have been a tireless advocate for sustainability in every form. And it's not just environmental sustainability, which is probably our most pressing issue, but it's economic sustainability, it's social sustainability, which has to do with our cultural institutions and with education. And city council plays a leadership role in all of that. So, how much time do we have?
7 minutes and 47 seconds.
Okay, so that's about half. And so if there's more you'd like to learn about me, go ahead and ask, but let's jump into issues and make sure we have time for questions, because that's not very long.
Anna?
Okay, so I'm going to preface this question with saying I'm a fan of term limits because a lot of people in my generation and the generation before me don't see ourselves representing the government. Is there a, figure out what this is. Did you consider other options other than return to a position you've already run for, like mentoring someone you like, and on the off chance you don't win because you're in a three-way race and the most popular candidate race, do you have any plans for staying involved and putting that experience to the use of the community even if you don't get a seat?
Well, so that's a really good question. So did I consider other alternatives? There are some people in this room that encouraged me to run for mayor. Apparently there are plenty of people who run for mayor. I think that would have been a way, certainly, that you can use the experience that you've had and you can build on that and serve in a different role. I would remind you that the mayor doesn't have a vote. I kind of like voting. You know, I kind of like being in there. Running the meetings is the most important thing to a council member with a mayor, is that they can get a grasp of the issues and run the meeting well, and also be a liaison, not only from council to local, other regional entities and so on, and work with the city manager. But I like the council member role. I'm familiar with that. And the other thing is, quite honestly, I have a 2-year-old. So I know what the commitment is, and it's a big commitment to be on council, but I'm familiar with that and I know I can do that. But to run for mayor is a considerably greater responsibility, especially in terms of meetings during the day and all of those sorts of things. As far as other ways to be involved in the community, I'm currently the president of the board for the Broomfield Early Childhood Council. Serve with Devin and Guyleen on that board. And I've also I'm still on a number of committees, including 2 committees of the Community Foundation, a committee of my church. I'm the volunteer coordinator for Team Left Hand Bike MS. I mean, the list goes on. So I'm somebody who is definitely a joiner, an involved person. But around mentoring potential people on council, the best mentors I ever had were people that were already on council. They understand it from that perspective. So I won't go longer because that's kind of a long-winded answer. But yes, in the back.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And I have a few questions around the oil and gas. Trying to convince them. So,
Can you stand up and speak?
as a preface, as I recall, when the bowl pad was approved, you voted for that, which is the predecessor to the Livingston pad. And that had quite a few wells on it, and it's closer to homes in the Livingston and the top. So that's just background of, as I understand your record. Much more recently, the vote for the open space charter amendment was just turned down. Would have required all the gas companies not to drill out open space, just to go through the public process that any other development would have to go through. It's not like you have to let them drill. It's just they to go through the process that any other business would have.
What's the question?
What's the question, Ian?
And then one other, I want you to talk about all this stuff.
Okay.
The city is
only
reviewing
got
the
3.5
regulations
minutes.
now with 181 and the 301 saying you have to correct all this. What's
Did you have to?
specific-
I'm sorry, I didn't know the last part.
301 tells us.
Protect health and safety.
Right.
Protect health and
Got
safety.
it.
What specific regulation improvements would you advocate for within the city? Maybe around setbacks, maybe around air quality. Go for it.
Okay. I don't know if we have time to cover every aspect of oil and gas, but what I will tell you is that the main focus of everything that was approved during the time I was on council was based obviously in the context of having far less local control than we had now. So what did we do to try to get local control? Well, we tried to do it by negotiating and by passing MOUs. And we really didn't know nearly as much about that at the time as we did now. So those decisions, the decisions that I recall, were unanimous because we really tried to, through the MOU process and negotiations, impose more regulations than the law would allow for us at the time. And so that was the spirit in which that was done. So it certainly wasn't that we wanted them to drill. And it certainly wasn't that that anybody was inviting new operations into Broomfield. We really felt like we didn't have those options, which is why we've supported more local control, right? And so then then you go into the question of, so I think then you were asking about more local control essentially.
Well, and particularly local control on open space.
Okay, so let's talk about open space. So one thing that bothered me about that vote, there are 2 things that bothered me about that vote. One is I'm always a little bit skeptical of things that I felt weren't kind of completely baked and you have to pass it the night before it's going to expire. I felt like that could have ideally used some more discussion, true discussion. Now, does that mean I support drilling in open space? Absolutely not. But actually, I haven't talked to anybody that says that they do. But I think people have different ways of going about that. Now, one thing that I will tell you is I don't think that there should be any use, transportation infrastructure or oil and gas, that should bypass that process. So, I mean, when was the last time we needed to build an emergency road or put in utilities through open space as an emergency measure, that they couldn't go through the normal process? Council has put in place processes that ensure that they go through OSTAC, that they are vetted through public hearings, that everything that should happen for any kind of development. So particularly any kind of light industrial development. So that's a process question.
But you wouldn't have voted for that.
I would have voted for something more robust than that. So, yes, I mean, that's the thing about serving in office. You can say, oh, well, we put something in place for, prairie dogs, and then it ended up hurting this other habitat. And they say, well, you wanted to harm that habitat. Well, no, I didn't want to harm that habitat. It's like, I mean, it's complex. And so I think that's one of the greatest challenges in serving. It truly is. And standing in front of people and explaining why it is that you would do that. And trying to work through the process in a way that includes citizens and concerned parties and the rest of the council in a constructive way. So, in terms of the opportunities that we now have, yeah, we have to look at all of those, right? We have to look at setbacks. I don't believe with residential areas that they are nearly far enough away. You know, so just a quick story. So I go up to South Dakota every year on vacation with a friend of mine. We're coming back, and there's this big floor mat in a gas station in Wyoming, and he knows that I'm running for council. He lives in Lakewood. And it's a big thing that says, you know, coal, oil, gas, support, you know, whatever. And he goes, well, how do you feel about that? And I'm like, well, I am fine with that in Wyoming. So that's a pretty big setback. That's fine. But I think, I mean, we're not going to get away with that, obviously, as alluded to before. But one of my biggest concerns, obviously I mentioned this before too, is the safety of existing wells and how those are capped in the reclamation process and holding people accountable throughout that process. There was something else I was going to say and it skipped my mind. So is there something that I didn't answer in your question?
Probably.
I'm gonna give Kevin one more question.
Okay.
Got some three. Becky.
I'll put my question to Lori.
Lori.
I think we have time for one more question.
One more question and then we're gonna.
So as a follow-on to what Neil asked, and just to kind of complete that thought, so over the past 3-4 years, this community has been very active passing that state law that this community so desperately needed. Did you play any role in helping to make that change in SB 181?
You know, that's a really good question. So, am I an activist? No, I'm not an activist. I mean, the closest thing I've ever been to an activist is talking about Rocky Flats. So when I was at CU, I was an elected representative at CU, and I was on the environmental board, and I did protest Rocky Flats and trying to get them to close that down and clean that up. So that's probably the closest I've been to an activist of any sort. Although my parents did see me on TV at a protest once that was a free speech protest. But so no, I haven't, but I'm a concerned citizen. And you know, honestly, for council members coming off when it comes to council kinds of activities, I almost feel like you have an obligation to step back and let council be council. They're elected by the people. That doesn't mean I haven't had conversations with multiple council members around those. So yeah, I'm a concerned citizen. I vote, I talk to a lot of people. That's the extent of it.
Thank you, Kevin.